Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Richards. Joey Cougar and the Starfish have the week off. They are tuning their instruments. So I'm coming to you today specifically because we are really close to Election Day, and of course, most of the focus, or a lot of the focus, has been on Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton versus no qualification, Donald Trump. So a lot of the focus has been on that. We've had seen songs about this, at least from the first debate, and then Joe Cougar and the Starfish could no longer make songs about the debate because they were too depressing. But what I wanted to do today, as Joseph Richards, I wanted to come to you and tell you a little bit about a Senate race in Utah that I'm focusing on. And I want to tell you kind of who I'm voting for and why. So it's Senator Mike Lee, the incumbent, or one of the two incumbent Utah senators, versus challenger Misty Snow. So Mike Lee, and doing a little bit of research about this, kind of finding out some of the things that he's, some op-eds that he's written, some bills that he's supported. One of the things, they're really kind of two areas that I find that my opinion diverges from his perspective. One is on the role and rights of women in the world, and the second is on the role and rights of gun owners. Now, gun ownership is the easier one for me to talk about because I personally don't believe that anyone should own a gun. I don't understand the need for guns. And I would defy anyone to actually give me a reason why a gun needs to exist. And I defy you to give me that reason beyond arming yourself and protecting yourself. Or as Mike Lee mentions, how does he put it? It's a right granted by God and protected by the Constitution to arm ourselves. Now, obviously, several issues I take with that. First of all, I don't believe in God, and so to say that we have a right granted by a being that not everyone either agrees exists or believes in necessarily the same one, that's a little bit of a stretch for somebody making policies for a plurality of citizens. And so, I again would be very interested in hearing an argument for why guns need to exist in general. And it can't just be because criminals have guns, because in that argument, guns still exist. So we could talk about guns some other time. And what I like about Misty Snow is that, in her platform on her website, she does mention wanting to close gun background check loopholes, including the loophole for gun shows. She's very interested in making sure that people who have violent offenses or history of violence, especially any kind of specific domestic violence, would not be allowed a firearm. And I think that just makes sense. I also think the right to bear arms is completely antiquated. I think it's unnecessary. And I think if we want to be amending the Constitution, why not amend the Second Amendment? Now, here's the funny thing. If I ever decide to run for office, I'm sure this video will come up, and that's fine. I will talk about that then. But I'm not currently running for office. Mike Lee is running to remain in office, and Misty Snow is running for his position. So obviously that's one of the areas where we diverge is gun rights. Well, I diverge from Mike Lee and I converge with Misty Snow. The second one, and potentially one of the bigger ones, is the issue of women's role in society and women's rights. Now I'm gonna pull up Mike Lee's website real quick so I make sure that I get this right. So he had an opinion piece, an op-ed published in Conservative Review, and this was from February of this year. And the title is Don't Force Women to Fight. And he talks about basically when prominent military and political leaders have been calling on requiring all American women to register for the Selective Service, so potential military conscription. Now, he is strongly opposed to that, and some of the reasons he mentioned that is let's just I'll quote him to quote to clarify, we are apparently now contemplating a future national emergency in which young women, as young as teenagers, are taken against their will, sent to boot camp and off to war, while eligible, able-bodied young men are not. Now, end quote. Now, what's confusing to me about that is I don't believe that people are talking about getting rid of military conscription for male-identified individuals, but I could be wrong. So let's see what he says further. Quote, as the father of a teenage daughter, as a husband and brother and a Christian, I'm going to say this as politely as I can. This is completely unacceptable, end quote. And then let's get a couple other passages here. Quote, 5,000 years of human civilization should be enough evidence to persuade us of this immutable fact, the immutable fact being that essentially women equal is not interchangeable. But if not, and again I'm quoting, but if not, we also have reams of empirical data, including a massive study recently conducted by the Marine Corps. Still quoting here, war's hell and the capacity to meet the physical demands of ground combat are not equally distributed among our species. Therefore, societies who value their security select soldiers for their speed, strength, endurance, and other attributes that add up to destructiveness and lethality. And then I'll skip down a couple of paragraphs here. It's a question of human nature and human survival, the same reason husbands, and not their wives and kids, are expected to grab the baseball bat and investigate strange noises in the middle of the night. So basically, Senator Mike Lee believes that what applies to men should not apply to women. Now, I know that that sounds a little bit reductionist because I'm taking this one specific argument, but there are a couple of other factors where I believe we don't align on women's rights and women's roles. The other, one of the others is the right to abortion access. So Senator Lee is definitely in support of defunding Planned Parenthood or taking away federal dollars from Planned Parenthood. He also he sponsored Senate Resolution 312, and that was to designate November 8th, 2015. So obviously this was the week of December 8th, November 8th, 2015. It was to designate that week National Pregnancy Center Week. Now, National Pregnancy Center is also known as Pregnancy Resource Centers or Crisis Pregnancy Centers. If you look at the literature and some research, and I obviously, in full disclosure, I've worked on this issue in the past with Planned Parenthood and NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. Crisis Pregnancy Centers, Pregnancy Resource Centers, really they present themselves as being an alternative to abortion services and giving women all, quote unquote, all their options. But really what they do is they try to steer women away from choosing abortion, regardless of their circumstance and regardless of the facts. And they try to convince women to not choose abortion, often with outright lies, definitely with misleading information about complication rates, about a bogus connection between abortion and cancer. So Senator Lee supports these organizations. He also doesn't believe that men and women can and should be equal in military positions. I could talk about the military in general and how I don't believe it should exist. But either way, if you're going to ask young men to sign up for the draft, then why would you not ask young women to do so as well? I don't get the disparity there, and it can't just be based on a biblical interpretation of the differences between men and women. So we strongly disagree there. Now, I've talked a lot about Senator Mike Lee. It's clear that I don't support his policies. I don't support his beliefs on the roles of guns and the roles of women in society. Whereas obviously he wants gun owners to have more and more freedoms and make sure that they are afforded basic liberties, and he would like women not to have that. Obviously that's pretty simplified, but that hits at the heart of what he's saying. On the other hand, we have Misty Snow, and I'm just going to I'm going to pull up Misty's website and just look at some of the platform issues that she's concerned about, specifically the ones of which I have interest. So LGBT equality, paid maternity leave, that's a huge deal. So where Mike Lee is very interested in public lands, making sure that Utah, the state, has essentially rights and ownership to public land, and that the rights of gun owners stay the same, and crisis pregnancy centers, pregnancy resource centers are praised. Misty Snow is interested in things that can really help people. Paid maternity leave, since we are one of the few countries that do not have that as far as quote-unquote developed nations. LGBT equality, women's rights, $15 minimum wage. Now, I'm just going to pull up women's rights real quick on Misty Snow's page. And one of the things that she mentions, I need to find it. I was looking at it earlier. So she mentions that it's time to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is also sometimes referred as CEDAW, which shows a commitment for respecting the rights. So we signed the treaty in 1980. But failed to ratify it. Now let's just pull up the United Nations real quick and see exactly what that is about. So the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly. And there are 6 United Nations member states that have currently not ratified the treaty. Let's list those. So Tonga, Somalia, Palau, Sudan, Iran, and the United States of America. So we are one of the countries that rail against human rights in especially Sudan, Somalia, Iran. I mean, just think of how vitriolic we are against the Iranian government. Whereas we refuse to ratify a convention that says basically the following. So by accepting the convention, we would commit ourselves to undertake a series of measures that would include the following: to incorporate the principle of equality of men and women in our legal system, to abolish all discriminatory laws and adopt appropriate ones prohibiting discrimination against women, to establish tribunals and other public institutions to ensure the effective protection of women against discrimination, and to ensure elimination of all acts of discrimination against women by persons, organizations, or enterprises. Now, that doesn't seem to me like something that should be something we're opposing. Basically saying men and women are equal, or I guess to get more specific, male-identified individuals, female-identified individuals are equal. They are equal. They can do the same things. They should have access to the same services. They should have access to the same pay rates. They should have access to the same rights and respect as one another. And instead of supporting something like that, which Misty Snow supports and wants us to ratify, Mike Lee instead would like you to believe that women are inherently different from men and can't accomplish all the same things or can't always serve in the same capacity as men. And that, for me, is why I will be voting for Misty Snow to be the next senator from the state of Utah.